We're on live on YouTube.
Oh, there was something else that occurred to me
Yes.
after this whole controversy on that it may be Amir Nachri.
Yeah, Rav Moshe Feinstein talking about the Tshuva, yeah.
You're frozen. You're frozen.
This timer, they would have said it was usher because of the same reasoning that they said Amir Nachri, it's not okay. Because otherwise, as he said, then you could violate all the third day malachos, just put them all on a timer.
So he said it's okay for lights, though.
For lights, he didn't even love it for
Oh, he
lights.
didn't like
He didn't love it for lights. I think he gives in at some point. I don't remember exactly. I think he gives it. But bottom line is the minhag Yisrael is that we have lights on timers, other things on timers as well.
But didn't he didn't hold from the idea that inanimate objects.
No,
can
he
violate
he
Shabbat?
did. He just thought it was his words, zilusa de Shabbos. It was a zilzul. Like I could violate all third time not violate. I could make sure all third time malachos are happening on Shabbos. I could just put it on a timer. So he doesn't. That was his problem. And he tried to say that, as it says here in Sif Aleph, right? It's mutter to have if something started before Shabbos and then continues into Shabbos, like the dye, the case of the dye where you're soaking the wool in the dye and you put it in on Friday afternoon and it has to sit there for a long time until it really the color takes hold on the wool. That's okay. But the question of if it's the action starts on Shabbos, timer I put it on, but the action started on Shabbos. So he said maybe it's different. Maybe the fact that it starts on Shabbos is different. I'm not sure why that adds up,
So
but
what about those new lamps that you twisted?
The Shabbos lamps?
Yeah,
so that's
Those
on
are
the whole
fine.
time.
it is.
You're moving the
directing
cover.
the light.
You're moving the cover off of it.
Yeah.
The truth is, by the way, you could probably even take. I'm not saying something really controversial, but you could take that actual, I think, physical lamp. That you can't turn it on or off, and you could move it. Right, if like there was a need for it, because it's like when we get to the halachos of kalim, muktzah, things like that, you can move kalim, l'tzorech gufo, l'tzorech makomo, and so that might be in l'tzorech makomo. I need the light over here now, so or I need l'tzorech gufo. Actually, probably that's more l'tzorech gufo. And if let's say you have a fan, I think the case where Moshe talks about is a fan that's on, one of those fans that's going blowing.
Oscillating.
Yeah. So it's annoying you because it's blowing in a certain direction. You're allowed to turn it, but you can't turn it off, but you can turn the fan in a different direction because that's tzorech makomo. Because I need my tablecloth not to keep blowing up every time the fan passes by.
If you can stand it, I have one more question.
Yes,
on
please
last week.
go for it.
So when we were talking about the dye, it occurred to me that sometimes, you have whatever, grape juice or red wine spills on the tablecloth. And people will take club soda and pour it on it. So you're not supposed to
That's
do
a
that,
problem.
right?
Yeah, it's a problem. The spills are a troublesome thing because cleaning, there may be a few different things that could go wrong there, right? One is in some ways, that when you clean something, it's almost like malaben. You're which again, I think
People
we're all
don't
gonna
rub
get.
it, they just pour it
They
on.
pour it on, yeah.
But that's like a dye, right? It's like setting
Yeah,
emotional dye.
it's you're trying to change the color. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So it's
So
the thing that you really shouldn't do. You shouldn't do it. Yeah, you really should. It's frustrating. Sometimes I have it happen on my shirt. I'll spill on my shirt, or more often my children will cause some stain on my shirt. And you're not really supposed to take a thing and start to go like this. Because so I do. I just leave it on there, and then when I'm done with lunch, I change. I don't waste changing right then and there. But yeah,
Quick question.
yeah, Tom.
About a tablecloth, for example, like putting salt on it or seltzer on it. Isn't there something about being able to enjoy Shabbos and the Yom Tov because this is going to cause a distress for whoever, and unable to be able to enjoy the day, otherwise we're distressed all the time? Is there some kind of a cooler on that?
Not when you're dealing with like a real malacha. I don't think we have a kula on that. There are. I heard you just mentioning it, right? David was just mentioning over here that when you have like and that's even like a diaper or something like that, or like that's even different. That's just about like sort of moving in some ways, something that you would have otherwise treated as a muktzah issue. This is you're dealing with a derabanan there. So the rabbis were lenient when it came to certain things on a derabanan. But when you're dealing sort of into oraisas, there aren't too many kulas you're going to find when it comes to kavod habrios or something like that, or to kavod Shabbos or oneg Shabbos. Oneg Shabbos does take precedent in certain circumstances. The example that I like to quote is always the double derabanan on a. So you have a derabanan melacha with and you do it ali de nochri, so that's already a derabanan on a derabanan. So the rabbis will say that when it's b'mokum, oneg Shabbos or something like that, that should be mutter. So that's the challenge here. When it's the doraisa, that's a really.
But is that the oraisa? If I put a seltzer on it or whatever, I'm not rubbing it. I'm not saying rubbing it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Hinda was pointing out is that an attempt at dyeing the color of the tablecloth, like purposeful?
It's not a dye. It's just.
Yeah, no, it's not a dye, but you're definitely trying to change the color, right? You're definitely trying to, in some ways, color it, or decolor it. But that's a kind of so I would be very cautious to do that.
Interesting.
Yeah. I would be cautious to do that. Yeah. Yeah. I told you, everyone who dares to come back every week is a dangerous thing. You learn Hilchot Shabbat. Okay. But don't worry, I'm not going to make you wrap yourself up in a bubble, in a plastic bubble. Spend Shabbos there. Okay. So last week we left off. We talked about the case of the dyeing the wool. We talked about when you leave the ink in the pot, the ink is soaking the entire Shabbos. We talked about the flax that were in the oven and they're being dried out. And when we talked about the case though of the wool, if you take a look at the third line of the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Nun Beis, he says, "Semer l'soch hayora she'ena al ha'esh." I mean, even to put wool in a vat that is not on the fire currently right now, right? So it's not on the fire. V'hi tucha betit, and it's covered. The cover. It's not just a pot cover. On top of the pot cover, I then place a clay mold over it. It's obviously a seal, but it's not something where when they just have a pot cover, so you could pull the natural instinct takes over sometimes, and you start doing certain things when you're near certain items. But when you put clay over top of it, the idea was you're going to get your own attention, like, oh, okay, right, it's not so easy to open it, and it'll remind you it's certainly Shabbos, and you. And that way you won't do something that was inappropriate. Now, why is it that it has to be off the aish? Why can't it be? I can't remember. The rule is the whole simon is about if I do something before Shabbos starts, I can never, ever violate a doraisa. D'Rabbanans maybe, but a doraisa can never be violated according to Beis Hillel if the action takes place before Shabbos and then I can let it continue into Shabbos. But here, the Rabbanan factor is, it can't be on the fire over Shabbos. Why? Because if it's on the fire, I might come to stoke the coals. I'll uncover the place where the coals are. And I'll take that tool that you use to stoke the coals, and I'll stoke the coals. And that kindles the fire a little bit stronger, and now I'm being active in the act of in this case I guess it would be dyeing the wool, so the color is a deep color. The Shulchan Aruch writes that even if it's not on the fire, it's not even on the fire, I can't do this. So it was on the fire. It was hot, and before Shabbos, I took it off. I put the wool in, and I cover it. If it's not covered in clay, it's aser shema yagispa b'chaf, because I might come to stir it with a spoon. So I'll quickly take I'll start spending Shabbos. Oops. And so in order to avoid the problem of stirring, that's why you have to cover it in clay. V'hamegis b'kedera. Now here's a very interesting flip. A yora and a kedera are different. A yora is a vat. You say, what's the difference? A vat and a pot. Kedera is a pot. And you see the Mishnah Berurah is going to point this out in a second. A yora is really something that's used in the case of dyeing. Right? You have a big something, you put the wool in, and you cover it, and that's used for that. A kedera is more used for the purposes of cooking food. The hamegis b'kedera afila eina ala eish. The halacha is that if you stir something in a pot, and this is questionable for a moment, you're going to see the wording was, you'll see the Mishnah Berurah corrects it a little bit. Chayav mishum mivasha. You'll have violated the biblical prohibition. That's why it's chayav. Chayav means chayav achatas. It's a biblical prohibition of mivasha, of cooking. Okay, let's pause and go to the Mishnah Berurah here just to clarify some things. Let's take a look at Daled about Shema Yechata. Usher is prohibited because you might stoke the coals. Take a look at Mishnah Berurah Sifkat at Daled. He says, "Hainu afilu yesh zman sheyiklot ein hatzeva mi ba'od yom afilu hachi usher." Mishnah Berurah says that you can't do this, even if there is enough time that the color would take real hold on the wool, even Erev Shabbos. So meaning it was already dyed a certain color before Shabbos started. Why? So what am I scared about? Why would I stoke the coals if it's pretty much done? I need so much more heat. Like why would I think to do that if before Shabbos it was basically colored already? And so he says here the problem is because there's blue and then there's blue, right? You want it to be a nice deep color. And so, you already looked at the pot and the wool's already turned blue. But if you really stoke the coals a little more and you increase the heat, it'll last longer. And undoubtedly, the color will be a deeper color. And that's what Chazal were scared of. That was the fear that you would still stoke the coals. Sifkat on hay. Shema, this is talking about that you might stir it with the spoon, and that even if it's off the fire, you have to cover it with clay in order so you don't stir it with a spoon. And this is what I was saying before. The Mechaber here kind of equates stirring in a vat and stirring in a pot, and he says they're really not shavet. They're really not one and the same. How so, or how not? Called sarko, and they're going to get into this the next sim. We're going to talk all about cooking. Okay, if something is completely cooked, it's mivushelas called sarko. It's completely cooked, like a cholent. Example here on this one will be a cholent. Right, I take the cholent off the fire. I'm ready to serve it to my guests. Two less bay isur. There's no more isur. Because if there was still an isser to stir it with it, all the Jews are mechalei Shabbos. That's it, and you couldn't serve it, right? What am I going to do? You can never get a spoon in there. The point is, once something is cooked, you're moving it around does nothing to speed up the cooking process. Ve'ilu beyora asur b'chol gavna lahagispa. But in a vat, it's never okay to stir it with a spoon. Why? He says kamavora, but lakam is siman shin yurches sif yurches, and in shin yurches, which you don't have on your packet, which is the halachos of cooking on Shabbos, not the Erev Shabbos part of it. So he talks about over there in yurches. He says there, he very clearly paskins, you can never, ever stir the wool that's in the pot. And the reason is because of Tzovea, and he says here, the Mishnah Berurah over there says, Shekenu meleches hatzviya lahagis tamid kedei shelo yisrachech. What is yisrachech? It becomes yisrachech. It gets like is it putrid? So even the hagasa, the stirring with the spoon, is going to, you don't want to become yisrachech. I thought it was like to become like soft, like it's going to become rach. Maybe it's charech. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's like burnt or something like that. I don't know. I have to look in the Jastrow for a second. But the point is here that that at the end of the day, the dye will become stronger. It will become a deeper color. And all right, hold on 1 second. Quickly check things now on the internet very easily with the Jastrow. There we go. If you know the word, you can jump in, anybody. But charach, get to roast it, to parch it, to burn it, right? So maybe you want to move it around. You don't want this part to get, to whatever. So you kind of stir it around, and also the dye is going to be, the color will be darker. So at the end of the day, that's why it's never okay, because you're enhancing the color and you're making sure that it doesn't burn. So there are things that you're doing here that are practically factoring into this situation. Okay. Va'alkein, he says, also you're not allowed to put wool into a vat that has boiling water, close to dark on Friday afternoon, late in the day. If it's not covered with the clay. Again, even if that has enough time for it to turn blue or to turn red, whatever the color is, you're looking to turn it. You might still come to stir it on Shabbos itself in order again to distribute maybe the heat. You're trying to so that one part doesn't get overly burnt. That you try to just make sure that and also the color will be more successfully will be successfully distributed. That's the difference between a kedera and a yora. That's why with wool never okay. Food, once it's fully cooked, what you do doesn't really play a much of a factor anymore. What this would technically mean is that you're allowed to stir the cholent pot while it's still on the fire, if you took the same approach. But there are other issues there, so be careful with that. When it's on the fire still, there's a whole topic of that sometimes even after something is bashal called sarko, the continuation of the cooking is mitzamek v'yafelo. It can still enhance the taste when there's a continuation of the cooking process, even though it's fully cooked. So that's something we're going to deal with when we get to the topic of cooking. So I just want to be careful. When a cholent is off the fire, good to go. And it's important to know when you take a cholent off the pot, for some reason, I don't know, you start putting something else in the pot, which is questionable. But if let's say you look on Shabbos, at night, you're like, oh, the top is already getting burnt and the bottom, I want not so partial. You can take it off, and then even you're holding on to it, stir it for a moment, and put it back on because you're distributing the heat and you're hastening the cooking process. Okay. Vav chayav mishum mevashal. You violate the prohibition of mevashal. The aliyeh hagasa b'kedera otachas miskarev habishul mehera. The stirring of the pot will bring about the cooking faster. And as I think my little note here points out in mine, the problem when in a yora is not the cooking, not the isur of mevashel, but in the case of the tzemer, the isur here is really tzobein. You're not cooking. You don't want to describe the cooking the wool. You're coloring it here. So that's the and that's what it says in Shinyun Chesed.
So is this just in the case of a boiling pot with food? He says kedera or tachat. Not boiling?
If it's, let's say, cold?
No, if it's warm. I mean, tachat is boiling, right?
Right. I would think that if it's, see, the thing is though, if it's off the aish, right? So at some point it will stop boiling. Probably actually pretty quickly, if I'm not mistaken. Right? The moment you take things off the fire, not so long. That's not such a long process between the time that it's taken off the fire and the time it stops boiling. It will of course be very hot. But I think that even if it's hot, there's a certain point where the temperature decreases enough that we might say that there's a difference here. But so long as the temperature in the pot can, in theory, cook, we might define that as something like or something like that. I think that it would probably be an issue just to stir the pot. Okay. Good. Let's go back now to the Shulchan Aruch. This is Inyan Diyoma for anyone who has little craters in their house. Okay. You're allowed to spread out nets exactly to catch animals, fowl, fish, even if they end up being caught on Shabbos. So as long as Erev Shabbos, I set it into motion, I set the trap, and then I catch the animal on Shabbos, that is not a problem at all. And you'll know that's actually literally one of the third malachos is to trap an animal, tzeda. So how is it mutter again? Because if you set the thing into motion Erev Shabbos, there is no violation of a biblical prohibition on Shabbos, and apparently there's no issur d'Rabbanan either, which again the rabbis didn't make any gzera here. That's all. So this means, by the way, if you have a let's say you put a mouse trap, in your house, you have an issue with mice or something like that. You're allowed to set it before Shabbos, and even if you snap the mouse on Shabbos, by the way, which violates two prohibitions. Number one, trap. Maybe it doesn't even violate Tzeda, by the way, because you just kill it right away. So it may not even be a Tzeda issue. But if let's say it was first trapped and then it doesn't die initially, or it gets trapped in the thingy and whatever, then it is still mutter because it was not done on Shabbos. That's the action of setting it up. Take a look at Zion. And he talks a lot about setting it up on Shabbos. Uve Shabbos, im hu osekain, if you set up the trap on Shabbos, uve shas prisaso, and at the time when you're sort of spreading out the net, nichnas hachayil letocha, as I'm just sort of finishing laying the trap, an animal happens to walk right into the trap, chayav mishum tzeda, then you violate the biblical prohibition of tzeda. Now, what of course is very interesting, the interesting diuk from the language of the Mishnah Berurah is that if I set the trap on, let's say, Friday night, and then Shabbos day, the animal gets caught in the trap, it sounds like it would be okay. And in fact, my little Dirshu notes here I have here, you don't have this. Let's say later on Shabbos, the animal walks into the trap. Kasav lekaman, the Shulchan Aruch paskins later she'ein baze ela issur d'Rabbanan. It's only an issur d'Rabbanan. They violated the Oraisa. It has to be in one fell swoop, because partly when you do the action, you have no idea if the violation will happen. Right? When I set the trap, I don't know that anything will ever be caught that during Shabbos. But me d'Rabbanan, it's not allowed, which is not a very surprising thing. That is the line that was drawn. But again, if it's before Shabbos, no problems at all. Of course, by the way, you have to be careful on Shabbos when it comes to how to deal with bugs. We'll deal with that when we get there. You're not really supposed to trap them, and maybe it's even problematic to kill them. So what do? My kids know what we do with the bugs on Shabbos is like if it's really like you're driving them nuts, right? So I'll end up getting it like onto like a plate or something like that. So it's like a little bit of kilacha. I'm not like and then I'll just take it out the door and I'll say, "Have a good day, my friend." He goes on with his life outside, but you can't really trap it, so you have to get it onto a plate and whatever. Okay, my kids, they don't know any difference, so I think that's normal. Okay, let's continue on in the Shulchan Aruch here. Mutter limkor le'eno Yehudi. Now the simon is going to turn to Amir L'Nochri. So more halachos about Amir L'Nochri. We've talked about in the past, of course, the business relationships that we can have with the non-Jew in general that encompass Shabbos. Now, some of the things that we have talked about already here are formally codified. It is permitted, to sell to a non-Jew or to give them something close to dark, so long as they remove it from my house before Shabbos starts. So the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah, here writes, Sif Katan Ches and Tes, Rotza Vilvad Sheyetze, Rotza Lomar, the Ein Shehus Lazef. There's not enough time for them to get it out of my house, so maybe even out of my courtyard. Oshahayina Yudi Masne. Or let's say the non-Jew stipulates that he's going to take it with him on Shabbos. All right, then to engage in this whole venture where they're going to do something that's rabbinically prohibited of taking it out on Shabbos, which again we'll say, what's the question? What's the problem here? And this goes back to something we talked about. It appears a certain way to the onlooker that suddenly that they're carrying your thing out on Shabbos. It looks like they're doing your bidding, even though actually it's their item. They bought it, they purchased it, or it'll look like also you did a business transaction on Shabbos. So you have here those two possibilities. So therefore, even the mechira itself, the sale is not allowed. If you know from the beginning that they're going to try to take it out on, with the idea and understand that they're going to take it out of your home on Shabbos. So you have to avoid making such a transaction where that's going to be the stipulation. Test niba odyom. As I was mentioning a moment ago, why do they have to get it out before Shabbos? Because otherwise it looks like the Jew has commanded the non-Jew to take it out on Shabbos. Right? So he's doing hotzah on my behalf, right? One of the malachos on my behalf. That's what it looks like. V'yesh od tamaza. Second reason, shol yachshidu es haYisrael shemachalo b'Shabbos o mishkanam b'yodam. So what else could it be? Right, the first one is like, it appears that I told you to do hotzah. Because here, come on, get it out of my house. You bought it, so I need the space. Here, it's that people are going to be choshed that the Jew sold it on Shabbos, or that he gave him a mashkon, collateral on Shabbos. And they're going to say, wow, Yankelo is not so frum anymore. And according to, for this reason, even if it's a city that is surrounded by walls, which is another way of saying you can carry in that city because it's surrounded by walls, or there's an eruv that's in that city. So okay, what's the problem in terms of the hotzah? There's no hotzah issue if there's an eruv. Unless it's a reshus harabim d'oraisa, which is, as we've talked about, such a rarity to find a reshus harabim d'oraisa. Why? So only reason 2 would be relevant. So v'chein hiskimu ha'achronim de'inyanenu le'inin mechira v'chein le'inin schiras eza chayfetz vaday yesh lahachmir afil mukefes choma v'a'enu yehudi darshan. The achronim are here, in this situation regarding the sale. They're not, or let's say you're renting it out or something like that. They're not so comfortable. They say vada yesh lahachmir. You should be machmir about this situation because of the second reason. People will think you made a deal, even if it's a city where it's an eruv or it's surrounded by walls. And the non-Jew lives in the city, so it's not like he's going to carry it from this city to that city. It's like all within the eruv. You got to make sure that they take the item with them before Shabbos starts. Okay. The Ramah here goes. Let's go back up on top. The Ramah says v'yesh matirin, that there are those who permit sheyotzi ha'eno Yehudi b'Shabbos, who allow it to be taken out by the non-Jew on Shabbos. Im yiched lo ha'eno Yehudi mokom mi'be'od yom beveis Yisrael. As long as the non-Jew is given the rights to a place in the Jewish home, Erev Shabbos. So that's those who allow this. Now, this is a little bit akin to, and I think he brings it up here. I can't remember if it was him or someone else I was reading. It's a little bit akin to what happens with Mechiras Chametz. When we sell the Chametz, you know that you give the non-Jew rights to the places in your house where the Chametz is kept. In fact, that's one of the ways we make the kinyan. Is we make a kinyan on the it's called the kinyan agav, right? So I sell the space, right, the karka, where the chametz is, and agav, derech agav, the metaltalin, the things that are movables, the food in this case, gets schlepped along in the deal. It's one of the ways in the Gemara talks about how you can make a kinyan. We make all sorts. I think I mentioned we make all sorts of kinyanim with the non-Jew, like 7 kinyanim in total with the non-Jew who buys the chametz, because we don't know which one works, because the Gemara never specifies which kind of kinyanim work with a non-Jew, which one don't. So we do all of them basically. So one of them is this idea where you have these, you give them the rights to the space, and so you see this here that when you give them rights to the space, it's almost like the item is already in their possession. And yes, it's in my house, but it was in their possession, and so this extra step maybe alleviates the concerns of the 2 reasons that we gave before. And I'm not sure exactly how that's the case, because the eruv is the eruv, but the other one is that it looks like it, and that's why I think you have the second opinion here, which says v'yesh lahachmir. Those are machmir, even in that scenario where you separate the space out, because at the end of the day, how do you know what the arrangement was? Yeah, so that's. I think that the reason that they're makil is because you took an extra step. And so because you took an extra step, yes, it's true, it won't actually affect what people know about when they see the guy carrying a thing. The extra step, it's like a counter force. It doesn't actually, it's not, it's like you're weighing values here. You've added something over on this side, so we'll overlook the thing over here. I don't think it's actually that it counters the reason for why we were worried in the first place.
It doesn't affect the Maritime.
What was that? Yeah.
It doesn't affect the Maritime unless he puts big signs out there that, he now rented the space. I mean,
Right. Unless
how would anybody know that?
correct. Right. That's I think the story behind the Yesh Lahachmir. Take a look here at the Yud and Yud Aleph as he tries to explain this. Yud in the Mishnah Berurah, Svarasam, the Have Keilu Kvar Munach Beveso Shel Einohi. What's the Svara? Why is it mutter? And it doesn't deal with the Maris Ayin issue here, but it is that it was like it was already in the possession of, in the home of the non-Jew at that point, and therefore it's just all non-Jewish property. And so who am I to tell him that he can't take his stuff from here to there in his own property? That's probably the thinking here. Again, it doesn't deal with the other issue. As I said, it's not a direct fire of a war here where like is a direct hit on the svara from the other one. It's not the case at all. Yud Aleph, Yesh Lahachmir, Kadesh Lo Lahargil Ha'ino Hudi B'Kaf. You should not train the non-Jew basically to think this is okay, that they can start taking things from the Jewish home when they buy it on Shabbos, that there's such a proper arrangement. Because one time they won't make this whole thing where they rights to the spot. To the mokom. The achronim actually argue, like many of you are, that by the letter of the law you shouldn't be lenient on this one because it doesn't make sense, right? The kaimalan b'simin tov mem gam gabe chametz, as I talked about, right? With regards to chametz as well, the lo mahane b'yichei lo makom. It doesn't help to transfer chametz into the property of the. You say, I give you this, by just being miyached that you have rights to this spot, that should somehow affect that the chametz is out of my possession. That doesn't work according to the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Taf Mem. Gam de haroa savur sha Yisrael tzivah lo hotzio. And by the way, furthermore, at the end of the day, you still have reason number one that the person might say, well, you told them to do hotzah, right? You told them get it out of my house, which means that they're doing hotzah on your behalf. Don't be lenient in this situation unless there's a really great need, or there's a tremendous loss involved. By the way, that's the by the way, the whole reason I think Mechiras Chametz has gotten off the ground, hundreds of years ago was because of alcohol. I mean, well, what were they holding on to? They didn't have refrigerators or freezers. What were they holding on? Their bread didn't last as long as our bread. Whatever they put in our bread, they didn't have their bread. What was lasting? Over the course of the whole holiday of Pesach, that you wanted it was worth it to sell it, and it wasn't going to be putrid at the end of Pesach. The answer was alcohol. That was it. Now we have freezers and refrigerators, and we can store things for a lot longer. And we have preservatives, and the peanut butter can sit not refrigerated for 6 months. It's a different world. But that was the whole reason for Mechiras Chametz, I think, coming into being so popular. Now it's, I think, expanded. Now you have multi-million-dollar deals that happen because you have people who own the hospitals, and they have to sell all the chametz in the hospital and foods, grocery chains. Anyways, so only if it's a makom hefsed and tzorech gadol. Now this is I broke my head on this line for a good amount of time on Shabbos when I was reading this. If he's a mute, he's a deaf mute. If the non-Jew is a deaf mute, yesh lahatir. Then we allow this. Afilu below yichei lo makom. Even if we don't even have the part where you say, you have rights to this spot. Because in this situation, we're not gozer. That's all he says, by the way, about this. Then he goes on to talk about one other thing we'll talk about in a second. I said, why? Why if a person is a deaf mute, suddenly we have a heter here? What happened?
He's not going to tell anybody.
So he's not going to tell anybody, number one. Okay, that's a fair point. But I think that the traditional view, and this is not a critique on even Chazal or the ancient world. I think that the ancient world thought that a person with a deaf mute was completely not there. Right. And so therefore, if a person was doing that, number one, this is my own svara. I could not find anything more on this. Number one, I'm not sure that you can have an actual real mechira with someone who doesn't have that kind of das. Sure. And so therefore, if they are carrying it out, no one will assume there was a sale here that was made on Shabbos, because this person is not in a position where they're capable of making such a sale. And secondly, the other question about, they're doing it on my behalf, they're carrying, you could just simply assume, okay, they took it, whatever reason, they took it and they started carrying it, and there's no way that the Jew told them to do this. Okay, and he just doesn't understand, because he probably doesn't have any das to know what he's fully doing. We understand today that that's not the case, and there are people, of course, who are in this position who can be very brilliant, and they just have a difficulty of being deaf and mute, and that's we have Braille and we have things today that they can communicate in ways that they didn't understand. They didn't understand they could understand things. So I couldn't find that anywhere. That was my thinking through of that situation as to why that would be allowed. And the Magen Avraham and the Taz mentioned this, by the way. It's not like it was one person. The Mishnah Berurah is just picking up on that. Kasav Olas Tamid. The Olas Tamid writes, near the Im Hisker Es HaCheder, La'ena Yehudi Bepruta, Al Meshach Yom HaShabbos, Ein Lahachmer Klal, Ayin Sham, Av Al Magen Avraham, Hushar Echon Kasu Dafilu B'Schiris HaCheder, Ein Lismoch Lak. Now you're actually saying you have rights to the room, right? I actually rent out the space, right? Which is what we do when it comes to chametz. Like the non-Jew actually pays, will pay me in a few weeks when I do this. He's going to pay me for the rights to everybody's space who ever sells chametz with us, and then all the stuff and all the stuff in there. So there he says, okay, the Olas Tamid says, okay, there as long as there was a pruta, which is what we do actually with mecheres chametz, we do literally a pruta. We're doing the minimum value of all the. Sometimes depending on how many people, so I have to count how many sales I have in my pile, and usually it's about 2-3 cents per person. So it ends up the whole sale for the whole in Israel Scarsdale, is done on about on 25 or 50 cents. That's the whole entirety of the sale. Each one of the kinyanim, each time you use kesef for it. Anyways, so he says you don't need to be machmir there, because there you rented the room. Now this is actually the non-Jew's property at which this item is found in. So there you can be lenient, but the Magen Avraham and other Achronim, they don't like this kula either. Even with Schirus HaCheder, Ein Lismoch Lakel. And again, I think the reason for them is what everyone was saying before, is that at the end of the day, you still have the Marasayan concern. So how can you get around them? Okay, that is Sif Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's just quickly start Beis, and then we'll stop. We're not going to read too much into Beis today, but let's start it. And again, we're going to really focus now a lot on the relationship between a Jew and a non-Jew. You're asking them to do something, and end up maybe doing it on Shabbos. So the Shulchan Aruch writes in Sif Beis, you're allowed to give your clothing to a dry cleaner, right? On Erev Shabbos. You'll see in a moment. We'll see. Or Oros La'abdan, are you going to give leather skins to a tanner? He says here, the person who's skilled at doing the tannery, and making the leather skin into turning it into the clothing, or something like that. As long as it's Friday, even close to dark, it's okay. Now this is a good review for some of the things we talked about in the past. That few conditions. When is this okay? Right? Number one, kotzatz. You have a price, right? The direct cleaner says you bring in a shirt, $2 per shirt. You bring in a suit, $10 a suit. A dress, so $10 a dress. Or they're doing it for you b'tovas hana. They owed you one, right? They owed you a favor. I did you something, and they feel that they owe you one. So they're not doing it for money even. They're doing it because they want to pay back the favor. Then it's okay because it's clearly like a fixed price. And condition number two, you have to say to them, I cannot say to them, do it on Shabbos, right? Yeah, you can say to them, I need it by Monday, because that obviously leaves Sunday for them. But I can't say do it on Shabbos. And the malacha cannot be done in your house. It has to be in their shop, in their whatever, not in your space. Then it's okay. Then you have a proper arrangement, And I'll add one thing, as we talked about in the past. The Mishnah Berurah is going to mention it. We'll review it next week. I cannot give them something on Erev Shabbos and then say to them, I need this, at Shabbos ends at 6:42, and you go 6:45, I'm going to be at your shop and picking it up. Because without using the words, please do this on Shabbos, I've basically boxed them into doing it on Shabbos. That is like saying to them, do this on Shabbos. So you cannot do that. And he's going to talk about that in terms of the dry cleaner situation. The Mishnah Berurah is going to point out that saying such a thing to them, where you don't give them a chance to do it, not on Shabbos, is ke'ilu saying do it on Shabbos, even without using the words.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Just wondering, my aunt passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And thank you. I have cousins who were saying Kaddish, but as a nephew, can I say Kaddish one time, or what the halacha is? I really don't like for a parent.
Yeah, usually it's if there's a more direct family member who's saying Kaddish, and you're not one of the Krovim, they
But
usually
it's
say
not even
Kaddish.
like an extra to say one time. Not really.
no,
Okay, I'm just
no,
asking, 'cause
yeah.
I know from the parent.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, thank you. Sorry to
Okay,
interrupt.
no worries. So, okay, I think we'll stop here. We'll continue this next week. We'll see the Ramah. There's a little bit of a discussion about the case of Tovas Hana, whether the doing the favor is enough of a heter, or has to actually be there's some sort of price that has to be literal price that has to be paid for the action. Okay, and then we'll keep going. There's a lot to talk about with regards to Samir Lanachri that we still haven't even touched on yet.